Hey, Ag Teacher Thoughts here. I thought I would kind of go over something as far as a lab that someone had talked about. What I would want to know is which would you rather have as your first experience how to use a scalpel? Would you rather it be an orange, or would you rather it be a straight up fetal pig that's preserved? If you're like most high school students that don't come from a real rural area where they hunt and fish, and deer and elk are kind of their subsistence meat, it's going to be a little bit of a shock. So, one of the things I started doing 5 years ago is prior to doing our dissection labs where we work with animal specimens, I used an analog animal. So, in this case, the analog animal that I use is an orange. And I've developed a lab that goes through this where the students are getting an opportunity to use all of the lab tools. And there's a lab sheet that goes with it. And they'll get the chance to actually do a dissection where what they're doing, it is familiar looking, it smells pleasant, and it is just overall an easier experience. And really, when I do a dissection, I want my students to do the best job they can on the first go round. So the fetal pigs, if you've shot for those lately, those are anywhere from about $26.99 up to over $30 for a fetal pig, especially if you get the double injected. That's a lot of money if you have a decent sized class, especially if you're putting 2 kids per pig. If you've got 20 kids, you're looking at 10 pigs. So it could be $300 or more for one lab. In that first day, when they first take that specimen out of the bag and they plop that into that dissection tray, there's a lot of things going on. There's the preservative fluid that drains out of the bag, the fact that the pig is a grayish brown, the odor that comes through there. Luckily we don't use the same stuff for preservatives as we did when I was in high school. But it can be shocking and it can be jarring, and there's a lot of trepidation and ooh factor in there that I really don't want my students to be struggling with. I want it to be a pleasant experience, and I want them to be calm and get to know their tools so that they can use them effectively without being inhibited by the shock factor of an animal specimen. So that's where I started using the oranges. And I looked for my file to share with a bunch of folks, and I had it for NAAE Ideas Unlimited a couple of years ago, and all I can seem to find is the lab notebook. But I had a whole bunch of precursor stuff. It's not on any of my current thumb drives here, so I don't know where it went, but I'll have to recreate it. But it had a teacher's guide with it. It had pre-work with it. It had the lab guide. But it was a full lesson involved around the orange dissection, and I really got to figure out where that went because that was a lot of work. But anyway, let me run you through a little bit of the lab and kind of how that works so that you can see a little bit about what I do with my students. So let's talk a little bit about the equipment that I use in my lab. First off, every student has got to bring that doggone writing utensil. Here's a little look at the lab sheet that we work through. There's a couple of things on this. With my students, I make sure that they do a ventral and a dorsal view. So with that, I make sure that, the stem scar is going to be the dorsal view, the stem star is going to be the stem scar, or the stem is going to be the dorsal view, and where the blossom is the ventral view. Okay, imagine like that's the belly button. It works better when it's navel oranges and you think belly button, ventral view, right? So what I have them do on that is I have them go through and actually sketch any of the things that they see on the exterior. So it's an exterior examination of the orange. Just like if you were doing a necropsy, you would go through and look for any damage. Look, there's a scar here. I would make sure that I'd be putting that on the dorsal view, that it's there. And I'd label and say what it was. So they're going to go first through and do an exterior examination, right? So that's going to be one of the first things on their lab sheet. I always make sure they have a blunt probe. That's going to work really well with getting underneath the skin of the orange and separating things. Several different types of scissors for dissections. And I've got the list of, which kind that they should have in there. And I just lifted as scissors because I know a lot of us don't have all the different types. So I have a few different types. I have a couple of different probes. I grew up calling them piths, but whichever. Different types of forceps, and then I have a selection of scalpels that I use. A couple of things to note. I know this is what the majority of us have, is these old reusables. I've actually been skipping to disposables. If we have a student that has, sorry, I don't know how far off I wasn't looking in the viewfinder. Okay, so there's some of the tools there. I know most of us have these reusable scalpels. I've switched to disposables for a couple of reasons. One, these guys always get rusty. You throw them in a container of bleach water to get them sanitized. You forget about it. The blades rust. The handles rust. They start looking nasty. With these scalpels, I started moving to disposables. I think these were $2.25 a piece. When they get dull, I throw them away. But the other thing is if I have a student that does injure themselves with a scalpel, I'm not having to worry about totally sanitizing a reusable one. I simply put these in the sharps container and dispose of it and just don't even worry about that as far as bloodbornes. I do have pins for labeling, and the tags are in the sheet, and then of course a scale for measuring. The other thing with my lab is you can use the silicone filled trays. I use the wax ones. That's what we have here. You're going to, of course, need your analog animal. And then the other thing that I have my students use is cut-resistant gloves. With this lab, this was one of them that I actually sent out during COVID. Believe it or not, I was cleared to send dissection equipment and fetal pig specimens out during COVID to my students. But the first thing they did was they did a group dissection with an orange. Because of that, to be able to send things home, I got cleared simply because we use cut-resistant gloves. Now, a couple things about them. Will they keep you from cutting yourself? Yes, but they will not stop pokes, okay? Pokes are okay, cuts are not. But I do have my students wear a nitrile glove underneath a cut-resistant glove, especially when they're first learning on the analog animals. So I'm going to do a little bit of this lab, see how much we can get. Got this all kind of set up here. See how much we can get here before I run out of time. Square that up. Let me put a glove on. I'm going to only put one glove on here just because the other one's going to be holding a scalpel, but I need to be able to manipulate my phone. So with the lab sheet, the first thing I have them do is I go ahead, and I just talked about that they're going to go ahead and do the drawing, right? So they're going to go ahead and draw what they see on the externals, okay? I would recommend also printing this single-sided. That's simply when we get back to the tags, which are on the back page. If you have it double-sided, they're going to remove a portion of their lab sheet. Okay. Next thing we do is we have them make an incision, and it's about a 1-inch by 3-inch incision in the rind. You can kind of read through that, and then we do that where we've got the stem scar, or where the stem is still attached. So they're going to learn how to use the tools with that. So you can tell them which one you want them to work with as far as which scalpel. The other reason why we're doing this with an orange is as we're going through here and we're using this scalpel, it is going to show them how important it is to get the appropriate depth on their cuts, right? So if you go too deep with that while you're doing a fetal pig and you really cut in there with a fetal pig, you are going to damage some of the organs below, okay? So that's why I'm using the blunt probe and not something else. But I'm going to have them go through and I'm going to have them use several of the tools to make their cuts. So this is practice on as they're going through. Okay, so this would be like their first big cut that they make down the down the animal, right through the abdomen. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that. Okay. Okay, so that peels off fairly easy. Okay, one of the things that we do next is we do label everything on our lab sheet. So if you were looking in here, it's asking for T-pins. I don't have T-pins, but I start labeling these by their parts. The rind of an orange really represents what we have on a regular animal. You have the different layers of dermis, same kind of thing on an orange. You have 3 different layers to the exterior skin. You have your exocarp, you have your mesocarp, which is right about there, and then you have your endocarp. All right? So it correlates to the same thing with the layers of skin on an animal, the different dermal layers. So that's one of the things that I have them do, and that's one of their first checkoffs, is to have their specimen on their skin of their orange labeled. Okay, let's go ahead and just for sake of time, I do have them go through, and I can have them go through and practice using a scalpel to remove the layers of tissue, right? So you can have them do that as they go through and see how clean they can remove it. But in interest of time and this video, I'm going to go ahead and just peel a section away here. The other thing is with this is you are working with an orange. So if you do have students that are behind, so they're really struggling, rather than having them skin the orange with a scalpel, just have them peel it by hand. It's a good way to catch your students up. So if you have one group behind, or if you have a group that really speeds through, make sure that they are skinning their animal analog with the scalpel. That will slow them down. Okay, so you get the idea how we're going through here, and they're going to be removing parts of this as they go through. Other things that we're going to have them do, there's a whole list. There's a whole list of things on here that they need to isolate. While we're at it, let me explain one of them right here. So this venal structure here on the exterior, on the carpals of the orange. Let's see if I can free this a little bit. Okay, this venal structure that we have on the orange, that little annoying piece that everybody goes through and peels off. Let's see if we can get this to stay steady. I do have my students go through and try to dissect out portions of the venal tissue. Just like they were dissecting out either veins in the animal, or if they were going through and say they had a nerve that you wanted them to go through, one of the larger nerves, if you wanted them to try to separate that out. So this is going to teach them those really fine scalpel skills. Okay. And then, you know, I do kind of make it a contest with my students. You know, whichever group can get the largest unbroken section of venal tissue there. So that's one of those there. So those veins that run right through here on the orange is what we have them go through and try to dissect out. Okay, so they're going to get that feedback of how deep they're going rather quickly when the juices of the orange are freed, right? So if they go through there and they jab it, they're going to get orange juice coming out. Okay, so we need to make sure that when they're going through, that they're very gentle and they're going right underneath where they should be. Okay, so make sure that they are using their tools appropriately. All right, what are some other things that we can do? Let's get this all the way open so we can get inside, just for interest of time again. We're already at 15 minutes. Sorry about that. All right. So the other things that we get to, again, there are ways to speed students up. There are ways to slow students down. See if I can get one out here. All right. So as we're going through here, once you get them going, you're going to have them deliver a carpal, which is going to be one of these sections here. So they're going to do that. They're going to stick a pin in that. They're going to label it. And then there's other parts inside the orange that do represent other things. There's my blunt probe. So these little pieces right here, okay, if you've ever wondered what those are called, these are vesicles. Vesicles are very, very fragile. Okay, so if you can get them to deliver a vesicle, that is that little tiny clear part, kind of see that? They're kind of drop shaped. You can get them to deliver a vesicle, that is going to be good, and have them do that with just the tweezers. The other thing that's in here, there's a few other things in here. You can have them remove out the walls of the carpal, because that's going to represent membranous structures. Okay, so it is fairly thin and fragile. If you think of the pericardial sac, or the diaphragm, both of those are fairly thin membranous tissues, and the walls of the carpal do represent that. Other than that, you can also have them go through and look for seeds. The center of the orange here, that venal structure there can also represent your spinal cord, so have them try to dissect some of that back. And then you've also got with a navel orange, you've got that little mini structure there to have them do that. So this is kind of a breakdown of how I do my orange lab. Again, this is just a quick run through of it, but do have them go through and dissect out venal structures, have them dissect out membranous structures, right there. Have them dissect out a vesicle, a carpal, label the exterior of the skin, but it's going to give them really good experience there with their tools, and make sure that they are using all of the tools that you give them. You know, some of these scalpels are really good at cutting, so remember, make sure, well, they should be good at cutting their scalpel. Make sure that you do give them nice sharp tools, and then they do clean up their equipment afterwards. But that's just a really quick run through on the Orange Animal Lab, and I hope that kind of answers what they're doing and kind of where that comes from. You know, try to work in a few of those others. And again, I will post this lab sheet to the group that wants it, but this is just a rundown on that orange analog animal. All right, hope that answers some questions. Enjoy the lab, have fun, and enjoy one lab that actually really smells good rather than a lab that's really kind of annoying and stinky. All right, hope you enjoyed.